The industry has normalized many ways that you can lift your truck, but I tell you, I take issue with a lot of them, and I want to go through all the differences between a cheap and a high-end lift kit for your Ford Super Duty. So the perfect example of some of the problems you have with these budget level lift kits is spring bow. So this one is our puck system that is mounted on the top, and you can see how much curvature there is in the spring. So right now the truck is sitting on the jacks, but the weight is on the spring. If your spring is bowing like this, you are not achieving a great ride quality. This one does have upgraded shocks, but it has the shock extensions, which I am not a fan of. So a couple of things that cause this spring to bow like this, in addition to just putting a spacer, is we do not have any change in the caster shim to essentially roll the axle backwards. So what's happened is the axle was here. As we did the level kit, the axle has moved forward, and you can see exactly what that does to the spring. As that axle comes down, it needs to come down in line with that spring, so when you hit bumps, that spring is moving in the motion it's trying to move. Imagine if you're compressing a little spring in your fingers. It's easy when it's straight up and down. As soon as you turn that spring sideways and start to compress, what does it want to do? It wants to shoot out. So in addition to the caster shims here, they could have added a drop bracket here or replaced the radius arms, which you can see right here with oversized tires and factory radius arms. It is easy to rub. Now granted, this is not a kit that we installed. The customer had this installed elsewhere, but you can see the massive bow in the spring. I can tell you this truck rides nowhere near what the trucks we build ride like. So we're going to show you some options you can do to upgrade this suspension. So the first thing you have to install on your Super Duty if you want to achieve a level or a lift kit on the front is something that changes the ride height. So you have a few options here. You can replace the coil with a longer coil. You can add a spacer at the top of the coil, or you can add a spacer at the bottom of the coil. Now spacers are simply cosmetic only, and most of the time reduce your ride quality. If you want to increase the ride quality, you want to go with a coil replacement. So on this truck right here, we have a lower spacer. What this has done is just simply push the axle down, separated the gap between the axle and the frame, gives you the increased ride height, but there are no items on this truck besides some shocks that change or improve the ride quality. Now when you do just these spacers and you do not change your caster angle either with shims or by replacing your radius arms, you end up with a spring bow, and you'll notice that spring is bowed towards the front of the truck. That will drastically reduce the ride quality. When you hit bumps, that truck is going to feel like it's bouncing around without a snowplow on the front of it. So next we're going to look at all the factory steering components underneath the truck. You have two options. You either need to replace all of these, or you need to drop them down to maintain factory spec geometry. So we'll start here with the sway bar. When you do a level kit, it's going to change the angle of the sway bar. The sway bar was designed to work in a specific geometric angle. Once you do a level kit, you either need to expand and increase the sway bar end links here by getting a aftermarket that is longer, or you need to install a drop bracket here and drop down this factory sway bar. Those are your two more budget-friendly options. So our next component is our track bar. The track bar holds the axle housing centered to the truck, so as you hit bumps and that suspension goes up and down, your axle doesn't walk out from underneath you. So there's a couple things that happen when you lift the truck and you drop that axle down. You change the angle of this track bar. When that angle changes this way, what does it do? It pulls the axle towards the driver's side of the truck. So you'll notice a lot of these cheap level kit and lifted trucks will look like they're dog walking down the road, specifically with the rear over to the passenger side, because the front axle is sticking further out the driver's side than the rear axle is. So you need to do a couple things. You need to replace this with a track bar that has an adjustable sleeve here so that you can recenter the axle. Install a drop bracket similar to this one that brings this down so that it is dropped down in the same position as how much level kit or lift kit you installed. So this one still has the factory track bar. A lot of these trucks will not do any kind of modification here where the track bar connects back to the frame, which will cause your axle to be off center and give you a dramatic bump steer when you're going over bumps. This one does have a budget-friendly option where there is a shim right here. This shim allows you to move the track bar bushing left and right so you can recenter this front axle. Next component we're going to look at is steering dampers. So if you go with a larger tire that is more rolling force, it is more force in the steering components, upgrading these dampers will dramatically affect how much bump steer and how much input in the steering wheel you get from bumps in the road. This one still has the factory damper on it. Underneath, radius arms are still factory. There are no radius arm drop brackets here, so we know that this truck is still running a factory caster angle setup. But with the level kit, we've actually reduced it. So my assumption would be this truck is probably sitting on about a 2-degree caster, which in my opinion is far too little, especially if you're running oversized tires. You're going to get a lot of bump steer when you're going down the road, especially at highway speed. So when you do a level or a lift kit, this axle is coming down. What that does is it changes the factory geometry of the radius arm. So as this radius arm moves in a downward angle, it reduces your caster. So the caster is the alignment of the lower ball joint to the upper ball joint relative to the ground. So as that axle leans forward, your caster angle is being reduced. What you want is that caster angle being slightly back so that as you hit bumps, the tire tire has a nice return to center. On this one, I've noticed two things. Still has the factory shims up here, so there's no adjustment to the caster angle by using an aftermarket shim, which using those shims does come with a couple of downsides, but I did see they did upgrade shocks on this one, which is a good upgrade. If you want to improve your ride, the number one thing you want to look at first is the shocks. Now, some of these kits will come with a shock extension, or I will see people run with factory shocks, and you do a couple things. You're either bottoming out the factory shock or you're hyper extending the factory shock because you've lifted the truck and the shock no longer meets the range of travel for the vehicle. At this point, we probably spent around $1,200 for a entry-level level kit. We did achieve the level, so cosmetically the truck looks like we want it to look, but does it drive like we want it to drive? But let's talk about some upgrades we can do to make this thing drive even better. We're gonna move over here to our Carli Pintop kit. So this one has a complete replacement spring on it. That spring is perfectly in line, straight up and down with the truck. So when you hit bumps, the spring's gonna work exactly like it needs to. Not bowed out, it's not kinked, it's not going sideways. It is perfectly in line with the suspension travel of the truck. Now, in addition to replacing the coil, this Pintop kit has a replacement track bar on it. So this does a couple things. One, it gives us a heim joint here, so we can still mount to the factory location, which gives us clearance from the front differential or any other components down here, but it provides a very strong steel on silicone shim bushing in here, so this bushing is not gonna wear out going down rough roads. Over here on the passenger side, we have an adjustable sleeve so that we can move this adjuster in and out and get that axle completely centered when the truck has the weight down on the front springs. My favorite feature on our kits is this Carli torsion sway bar. This is an expensive option, but at anything we do up front, I have noticed as a standalone option, this one provides more ride comfort and stability than any other option we put on the front of the truck. So when you're dealing with oversized tires, it's very important to make sure and upgrade your factory dampening system. So you can see up here, we have replaced the upper damper with a Carli damper. Down below, we have a dual Bilstein. This is just one option. We also have our diff guard options that go on here. So on this truck, our coil spring is completely straight. There's no bow in the coil spring, and that is achieved by adjusting the caster. So we've done this a couple ways on this truck. So underneath, we have a replacement radius arm by Carli. So the radius arm connects into the factory location. On the frame, up here where it connects to the axle, we actually have shims that can go in on this lower portion. The more notches in the shim, the higher caster angle that it is setting on the front axle. So as you replace this shim, it's going to move this axle forward and back to achieve caster. So this one being number 4, it is sliding the bolt hole all the way forward and essentially leaning that axle backwards to achieve as much caster as possible. In addition to that, we also installed caster shims up here in the top to bring that ball joint just a little bit further back to give it some additional caster. This one is probably sitting at about a 5-degree range. Now you'll notice there's a lot of oil coming out of here. That was due to us jumping the truck a few feet off the ground, so don't mind that. You can catch that in another video. We have some drastically improved shocks over what comes from the factory. So we have our Keen shocks that are partnered up with a Carli Pintop kit. These things provide superior dampening. So as you're hitting big bumps on the road, these heavy tires, when they're bouncing up and down, these shocks are going to keep them firmly planted on the ground. We have limit straps on here, so if you do decide to jump the truck, you're not going to bottom out the shock and cause damage. On our other truck, you noticed how the tire was rubbing the radius arm. On these Carli radius arms, they actually give us a notch out here so that when you run a 35 or 37-inch tire, you get a little bit more space for that tire to get inside without rubbing. So we looked at multiple options. With the budget lift kit, you get the looks. With the Carli suspension, you get the performance. And when you're running these trucks hard day in and day out, you need that performance to make sure the components hold up like they need to. So if you want that level ride height or lifted truck look, but you want it to perform on the job and specifically last for the miles you want to put on the truck, check out our Carli Performance lift kit components and we'll get you set up with the type of truck you really desire.